Welcome to Perpetually Exasperated, the podcast where we've chosen to read new, best-selling books from both sides of the political spectrum, so you don't have to, and tell you how at times they've got the right idea, but mostly how they're missing the point of why everything kinda sucks. I'm Joseph.
And I'm Joseph's annoyed scowl. In this episode, we're going to be reviewing Overruled, The Human Toll of Too Much Law by Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch and Janie Nietzsche, a book that, per HarperCollins, says, America has always been a nation of laws, but today our laws have grown so vast and reached so deeply into our lives that it's worth asking, in our reverence for law, have we gone too far?
So, let's see how this keeps us perpetually exasperated, and why you should be as well.
Hey! Wake up! We're live!
What? Oh, shit. So sorry. I dozed off. I didn't expect this book would put me to sleep so effectively.
Yeah, honestly, it never occurred to me that not only can the adults in the Peanuts universe hold employment, but apparently one of them is a Supreme Court justice.
Well, we could at least say one thing. It's the American dream made manifest, citation needed. But, in all seriousness, and to his credit, compared to other writers like Tammy Bruce in Fear Itself or Pete Hegseth in War on Warriors, episodes 1 and 3, episode 4, please hit like and subscribe. We're very professional over here. We can't credibly say that this was ghost-written. This whole experience was, how do I put this politely? Just about as dull as we could expect from a Supreme Court justice and or his clerk in the form of Janie Nietzsche. That sounds like an insult. I get it. And I don't necessarily mean it as such, because I at least have to appreciate an author who actually writes their fucking work. That does need to be said. What also needs to be said, however, that this was a dreadfully dull, boring book, the most boring one to date.
Yep.
It took so much effort for me to get through this book. At times, I could not help but go into skimming mode. Just get through this fucking book. Just get through it. Because there is so little he says that is provocative to me. Unlike all of our previous authors, left or right, who go out of their way to provoke outrage, be it from their base or from folk like us, who they're diametrically opposed to, he's just so mild. It's actually kind of off-putting.
Yeah, he's super measured and very reasonable. I'll give him that. But he does have one very good point, which is that we have moved a lot of the details of legislation from elected officers to, appointees.
Yeah, I suppose. I would also like to point out that this is a consequence of having bureaucrats, which is itself a consequence of having such a big bureaucracy for such a big nation that you need this level of legal, legislative interpretation and implementation. Also a Congress that is super fucking lazy. But, honestly, one of the biggest problems I have with this is the lack of nuance to any of his arguments. Take this quote from Chapter 3, Bureaucracy Unbound. Quote, today, forest rangers operate with thick books of rules. Makers of ketchup, peanut butter, vodka, you name it, contend with rules that regulate down to the smallest detail. Ketchup must have a pH of 4.2 plus or minus 0.2 at certain stages of its formulation. And peanut butter may not have a fat content that exceeds 55%. Even the way the fat content is measured is closely regulated. It must be measured according to the rules prescribed in Official Methods of Analysis of the Association of Official Analytical Chemists, 13th edition, 1980.
It sounds like a name of a book made up to sound extra official.
Yeah, to finish the quote, but good news for vodka aficionados, officials recently amended rules that once required vodka to be, quote, without distinctive character, aroma, taste, or color, unquote. Yay!
Nice.
Now, that does sound outrageous. I mean, for fuck's sake, I struggled through some tongue twisters, especially the fact that we had 2 uses of analytical and analysis next to association. That is psychotic,
There's
by the
also
way.
2 officials.
Oh, Christ,
It's the official message of official analytical chemists.
And you missed association in there, too.
It's so ridiculous.
This is so stupid. So, yes, fair enough. Why should ketchup and peanut butter be so stringently scrutinized for their pH content of the plus minus 4.2, 0.2? I don't even know what the fuck that is. And the fat content being exactly 55%. Why the regulation? And I don't disagree that there can be plenty of examples brought up as to overregulation. That being said, may I introduce a theory? May it please the court, if you will.
Yeah. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Wow, you're actually much, much better than Neil Gorsuch.
That's true.
Why aren't you on the Supreme Court? Not the point, doesn't matter. Funny enough, Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch doesn't bring this up. Maybe the reason we have so many stringent regulations is that we don't trust the companies creating the ketchup, the peanut butter, the vodka.
Yeah, remember that, I don't remember when it was, but I think it might have been the 1700s, the scandal where a bunch of bread makers got sued for putting sand in their flour. That stuff has been happening since time immemorial.
Wasn't that in, France or something like that?
It might have also been in France. I'm pretty sure, adulterating flour has been a pretty serious issue in Europe for hundreds of years, which is why they have such stringent standards around flour.
They have more stringent standards than we do, for the better.
Yes, because they have had a longer history of corporate abuse of these rules. Anyway.
Yeah, but the entire point is that these regulations, in theory, exist to not put harmful shit in our food. Maybe, just maybe, we should keep an eye on them and ensure that they, the corporations, limit the amount of chemicals they put in to ensure our food industry remains humming at levels that, frankly, should be rather unsustainable without extensive usage of pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, farming practices in general, preservatives, and so on, that the human body, maybe, possibly, just saying, doesn't like? Maybe? Now, do you see what I mean about the lack of nuance? We had to get into that. We had to go into a thought experiment as to why what sounds like bullshit actually kind of makes sense. It's stuff like that which takes any potentially decent point he makes, and he does make a handful here and there, and just throws it out the window for me. There's a reason regulations exist, because when your entire system is based around maximizing profit and the acquisition of capital, including, but not limited to, paying workers as cheaply as possible, raising prices as high as possible, cutting as many corners in the process as possible, it could potentially result in us being harmed by said system.
Yeah, my problem is just that he's either myopic on purpose or a pathologically dogmatic textualist. He talks about how it's crazy that all these laws exist, as though the stories about miscarriages of justice aren't why this stuff happens in the first place.
Yeah, worse than that, to me, he's just a hypocrite. So many of the legal stories he talks about are where usually ordinary folk are so caught up in the nuances of obscure, usually if not always, federal law. And the way he explains it makes it sound like the text of the law itself is applied so mercilessly and without any nuance to it that it frankly goes too far. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Now, very perfectly valid argument to make. I'm with you on that. Except for one teeny tiny problem I've got. He's how'd you put it before? A pathologically dogmatic textualist. The guy is devoted to what the text of the law says. It's in the name. You could easily argue, I'm not, but you could argue that the dude is a textualist pervert.
I would.
A textbook, definition of one, if you will. He probably gets hard just thinking about how to employ the strictest, hardest, most rigorous interpretation of the law. Not the point, doesn't matter. So what's he complaining about? Is it too textualist, even for him? I doubt it. Or is he obscuring the fact that he's a textualist to make people think he's the good guy, so stop being mean to him? Or is he just a hypocrite? I don't know. But the way he makes his arguments is so jarring to me and made it really fucking hard to read this book. For instance, in chapter 3, he tells the story of Marty Hahn, probably mispronounced that, but it sounds right, who decided to put on homemade DIY magic shows for folks in his local area. All well and good, and along the way, he acquired 2 rabbits, one named Charlie and another, a 3-pound Netherland dwarf rabbit named Casey. But then, quote, in 2005, a woman with a badge approached Marty after he finished a children's show at a local library in Missouri. As Marty later recounted to the Washington Post, she said, "Show me your license." And I said, "License for..." She said, "For your rabbit." Marty was perplexed. I told her I could understand needing a license if I was using tigers, but I was using a bunny rabbit, a 3-pound bunny rabbit. It turns out that the woman was an agent from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Many years earlier, Congress had passed a law requiring, among other things, dealers of certain animals intended for research to secure a federal license. Of course, Marty had no designs like that for Charlie or Casey, but by the time the agent approached him, Congress had amended the law. Now, the law required exhibitors, such as carnivals, circuses, and zoos, to apply for and receive the license too. Now, you might wonder what any of that had to do with Marty. His local magic shows weren't exactly in the same league as carnivals, circuses, or zoos. Still, agency officials responsible for enforcing the law had issued their own detailed set of rules, and the rules defined exhibitors to include not just carnivals, circuses, and zoos, but also animal acts and educational exhibits. So however one might read the statute itself, the agency's rules appeared to require even a small magic show business like Marty's to meet federal licensing demands, unquote. So, what follows is an increasingly embarrassing escalation of the amount of paperwork involved for Marty to keep using the rabbits and so on. And this combined with a story about a museum made from Ernest Hemingway's home in Key West, Florida, that allows for a bunch of utterly adorable, by the way, tame and very well-behaved 6-toed cats to roam around, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture essentially harassed this museum over licenses and containment, etc., and so on, blah, 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 blah. That's all infuriating. Yes, true, perfectly valid. But here's the thing. The department was following the letter of the law strictly. Too strictly, I agree. But what's the definition of a textualist again? Here, I'm going to bust out my Merriam-Webster dictionary. Haven't used this fucking thing since, elementary school. Quote, strict or rigid adherence to a text, such as the text of the scriptures, specifically U.S. law. A legal philosophy that laws and legal documents, such as the U.S. Constitution, should be interpreted by considering only the words used in the law or a document as they are commonly understood, unquote. Does that not sound like what happened here? What the fuck is he talking about? Is he a hypocrite? Is he dying of dementia? Is he just straight up lying? He's a textualist pervert, for fuck's sake. He would normally be booked for textual abuse. Stop laughing. Any or all of these could be true. I don't know. But the book is chock full of this stuff, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, his anecdote about the copper mine in, I don't remember the name of the city, but...
It was Butte.
Thank you, in Butte.
Butte,
is
Montana.
Especially potent. So you have a copper mine, and they are allowed to pollute without regard because of a lack of rules, and then rules are created in retrospect with regard to cleanup, and those turned out to be substandard. How is this an example of too much law? If anything, it's insufficient authority by regulators to set and achieve safe targets.
Yeah, look, I'm going to try my damnedest to be fair to him. I'm going to try, because we're in court after all.
That's true.
So, we're not actually. We don't want to be anywhere near court. But I think what his point is that the federal government and federal law are too broad to truly understand local or regional problems. This quote from Chapter 2, Far From Home, kinda explains his line of thinking. Quote, today, some states set residential cleanup levels for arsenic at 0.04 parts per million, ppm. Certain localities consider 100 ppm too toxic even for their landfills. Yet, in Montana, the EPA required Atlantic Richfield to remove only 18 inches of soil in residential yards, and the company had to do so only if soil samples reflected an arsenic level exceeding 250 ppm. For pasture lands, pretty much everything beyond residential yards, the EPA set the cleanup threshold at 1,000 ppm. When asked how the agency chose its thresholds, an EPA representative said the numbers fell within what officials considered an acceptable cancer risk range, unquote. And this is his main point at the end of the story. Quote, in the end, a majority of the court agreed with Atlantic Richfield and the government's reading of the Superfund statute, a federal law designed to promote the cleanup of contaminated lands, thus became a tool to thwart a local effort to do just that. While I disagreed with the court's reading of the law, from one point of view, the result is entirely understandable. After all, a law empowering a single central authority to direct cleanups is certainly efficient. And if there had been a strong national standard in the first place, perhaps the rampant pollution in and around Butte could have been avoided.
So he admits it.
Yes! Continuing. But what about Sean Houlihan, Rose Nyman, the Coonies? I swear that's what the last name was.
I believe you.
And so many others like them. What are they supposed to do when faraway officials say that they and their children face an acceptable cancer risk range, even as they watch family members, friends, and neighbors felled by disease? Surely the national government has an important role to play when it comes to protecting our environment. Surely, too, scholars can debate exactly where this field local power must give way to federal. But does any of that mean states and individuals should be quite as powerless as Montana and its citizens are when it comes to cleaning up their own land? Historically, states have enjoyed considerable leeway to administer their own laws regulating their own lands through their own courts, and landowners have been free to clean up their properties at their own expense. But not anymore within a vast region of Montana. Now, the federal government alone may decide what remedial actions can be undertaken. There is stuff that you cannot do because they stop you, Serge Myers, a 74-year-old great-grandfather, explained. If we had the money, my yard would be cleaned. I really would clean it. I'd hire the best they had to clean the darn thing. Unquote. But, I still don't get his point. Look, I'm not a lawyer. I want to be very, very clear about this, so maybe I'm fundamentally misunderstanding swaths of this issue. But it just makes me think it's so damn hypocritical, and yet also just obsessed with the idea of devolving power back down to the states and regional authorities, despite, at the same time, acknowledging that national standards could have solved the problem. But this quote from the same chapter really gets to me. It may or may not have triggered me. Quote, circling back to more recent times, think about the COVID-19 pandemic. The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, an agency previously concerned with workplace safety standards, asserted the authority to issue a mandate requiring some 84 million Americans to mask and test at their own expense, or take newly developed vaccines rushed to market in something called Operation Warp Speed. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, a federal agency charged with disease prevention, got into the business of managing local landlord-tenant relations. Both moves represented novel expansions of federal power into areas previously left to individual choice or local law. Put to one side the wisdom, legality, and politics of the agency's moves. Consider them only from a federalism perspective. A vaccination mandate might be issued at different levels of governing bodies. It could be imposed by a parent, a private business, a school board, or a town. It could be imposed by state authorities or the federal government. As you move up the hierarchy of power and widen the affected community, different costs and benefits accrue. The lower you go, the more variances in opinions and values can be accounted for. Different individuals may have different convictions about what they will put into their bodies. They may form different judgments about the sufficiency of data to support the efficacy and safety of novel technologies. Different areas may be populated by people of different religious beliefs that may affect their thoughts about the vaccines on offer. Those who live in rural and sparsely populated places may reach different judgments about the necessity of vaccination than those who live in cities and dense neighborhoods. By contrast, when decision-making is consolidated in agencies in Washington, D.C., it becomes harder to account for all these differences. To be sure, a centralized decision promises a quick and efficient response. That may be a vital benefit when it comes to a disease that knows no state lines. But centralization is not costless either. To our ability to tolerate and accommodate different views, to experiment with and learn from different approaches, to the promise of self-government and individual liberty. Some researchers have suggested, for example, that the different approaches toward mask mandates taken in states such as Florida and California provided critical data about the mandate's efficacy on the spread of the virus, as well as their impact on the mental health and development of children and other vulnerable populations. Unquote. Okay. Now, look. I have thoughts about anti-vaxxers in general. And I know there are plenty of reasons for some communities, such as Black Americans, who have, let's not kid ourselves here, been abused by medical authorities. The Tuskegee syphilis study comes to mind.
Or the development of the C-section.
Yeah, where they will be justifiably not thrilled about the idea of vaccines coming from the federal government at such a pace and with such urgency. I get that. But folks, I'd like to remind you of something. We just lived through a goddamn once-in-a-century pandemic that has, per the WHO, the World Health Organization, reported, as of recording, over 778 million cases and killed about 7 million people. And those are probably conservative statistics. I'm sorry. When it comes to actual honest-to-Jesus Christ pandemics, I don't give a fuck. Take the fucking vaccine, because this is something that isn't just affecting you. It is affecting your society, your community, your fucking way of life. Your arguments, in my personal opinion, are fucking invalid. Take the goddamn vaccine. Remember, Neil, you just said this is a pandemic that knows no state boundaries. Now let's be charitable. I'm going to dial this back just a bitty bit because I got a little triggered there. I'm sorry about that. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch isn't an anti-vaxxer. I really fucking hope he isn't. He just brought up the example to be as vivid as possible in his argument about when the federal government is needed and when it's not. But if that is the case, I consider it to be an utterly shit example and not worth any more of my time, because shit like this from him just pisses me off. It is so unnuanced, just like what a textualist pervert would think. This is textual abuse, goddammit! And I will not stand for it. Somebody lock this pervert up and release the Epstein files, by the way.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what he would have had to say about, like, the civil rights era. That added a great deal of federal legal framework to defeat the biased frameworks of the states, right?
Funny. There's a quote here about that from Chapter 2. Quote, California State Supreme Court Justice Goodwin Liu reminds us of a particularly poignant example. For decades before and after the U.S. Supreme Court's 1896 decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, federal courts routinely upheld deeply unjust segregation laws as consistent with the federal Constitution. What is lesser known, Justice Liu reminds us, is that despite Plessy, between the period from about the mid-1800s to 1900, there were several dozen state court decisions about school segregation. More than half of those cases granted relief to the black plaintiffs, largely on state constitutional or statutory grounds, within the confines of Plessy. In fact, as Justice Liu continues, the road to Brown v. Board of Education was paved with state court decisions, so much that, in 1955, when the U.S. Supreme Court rendered its disposition in the Brown cases, it reversed 3 federal district courts and affirmed 1 state high court. I think that alone should give us pause in thinking about who are the heroes and who are the villains, unquote. Now, his point ultimately seems to be this, which is about a paragraph later. Quote, in truth, the push and pull between national and local authorities that federalism allows has nothing to do with benefiting one party or another. It has more to do with the fact that no single government can always get it right. Protecting federalism means ensuring that when one government loses its way, another can help light the way back, unquote. Which, okay, sure, fine. But, it's so milquetoast. So much of a letdown of a conclusion. What's his point here? I don't get it. And by the way, going back to that whole thing about local and regional authorities having more control over cleanup and whatnot, they're going after corporations now, who, by the way, definitely don't know state boundaries, be they federal state boundaries or international state boundaries. These are titans that they're going against, and we need as strong of laws as possible to fight them. He, for some reason, will have the nuance of why sometimes the state courts do a better job than the federal courts. The eugenics bullshit comes to mind. Fair enough, but where's the nuance for where the federal courts have stepped in instead of the regional or the state courts? It is a one-sided nuance that he is giving in this entire thing, and it seems to be federal government bad, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, though weirdly, I'm not sure it's just federal government bad, because he has this whole spiel. I think it's later in that same chapter 2 possibly. Yeah. But he's talking about all these laws that were passed in the early 1960s and 1970s and how they seem really weird and specific and redundant, but they're all overwhelmingly concentrated in education, policing, and the environment. I wonder why. I wonder what could have possibly been happening around that time that called for lots of new laws in those areas.
Oh, golly, gee, I don't know. Maybe something about civil rights. Maybe there was a march or two about that. There was something about poverty and war, both at home and abroad, by the way. Fuck it. Mask off. Perhaps something in there about how companies were, are, and continuing to make this planet ever more unlivable and literally poisoning us with their industrial waste and shit. Remember that copper town from earlier? That's what the federal law is for. Was it interpreted poorly? Sure, fine. But the federal courts can also do their own digging into the regional nuances and aspects of it. They can hear the arguments and they can understand that, okay, by this metric, yes, it's true, the company did a shit job. Even though they will claim they're following the law at the time, fine, but they still did a shit job. It's not just the letter of the law, Neil. It's the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law in this particular case with the cleanup is to ensure that Americans have a fundamentally decent life. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Something like that in some declaration somewhere. Jesus fucking Christ. But if you encourage the federal government, if you encourage every single court at every level to have some kind of respect for the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law, maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't have these kinds of discussions to begin with. But nope, federal government and federal court, which you're on, by the way, is bad. Therefore, devolve to the regional authorities so that these multinational corporations can keep fucking us over, I guess, with their army of fucking lawyers.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be quite enamored with the 1960s and how there was less law and less federal government. But fun fact, the largest corporation at that time was GM, with about $10 billion in annual revenue and in the ballpark of like 85,000 employees or so.
That's it?
Yeah. Now it's Walmart.
Of course,
with
it's
almost $650 billion a year in ARR and more than 2 million employees.
Woo.
Every one of the top 10 US-based companies by revenue outstrip the tax revenue of every US state. Mm-hmm. Access to global markets has changed the size and power of our legal adversaries and the necessity of a strong legal framework to protect us.
Yep. Nailed it. No notes. This absolutely needed to be brought up. This is a huge blind spot that Justice Gorsuch simply will not acknowledge. And frankly, what a vast majority of economically conservative people will not acknowledge. We're dealing with entities that are not just state, not just regional, hell, not even just national, but multinational corporations. These are powers in themselves with access to a stupid amount of legal assistance that not a single citizen, nor even a group of citizens, let alone some state governments, can deal with. Hell, sometimes our national government can't deal with these fucking multinational corporations. Only a nation with strict laws that are designed to protect people rather than corporations, they're not people, shut the fuck up, Romney, can we have a functioning nation. But no, that doesn't matter to Justice Gorsuch. No, we still need to devolve back to the good old days of the 1950s and the 1960s when nothing bad was going on. Nope, no sir. And look, I would love to devolve myself. I do think that the federal government may have just itty too much power. But I would also, before that, like to devolve some other organizations, maybe have them not be so big and powerful. They're corporations, by the way. And by the way, remember how I said, like, it doesn't matter to Gorsuch? Yes, it does, actually. Or at least it should. Do you remember that quote from chapter 2?
Refresh my memory.
Okay, hold on. Here we go. Where is it? It is... In the end, a majority of the court agreed with Atlantic Richfield and the government's reading of the Superfund statute. A federal law designed to promote the cleanup of contaminated lands thus became a tool to thwart a local effort to do just that. While I disagreed with the court's reading of the law, from one point of view, the result is entirely understandable. After all, a law empowering a single central authority to direct cleanups is certainly efficient. And if there had been strong national standards in the first place, perhaps the rampant pollution in and around Butte could have been avoided. Your Honor, Justice Gorsuch, Neil. Can I call you Neil? It's right fucking there, my guy! How are you not seeing this shit?
Yeah, like, now I agree with one thing that he says, which is that the size of the code and the procedure used to create it have ended in a lot of strange, broken, and contradictory situations.
True.
But so did a small code.
Mm-hmm.
The contradictions simply manifest in unspoken cultural differences between communities, leading to less predictable and often more violent resolutions. He manages to get out without too many, meaningful suggestions, but his implication is that law has just gotten out of control and simply ignores that the behavior of supranational legal monsters has as well.
Correct. I agree. Completely. There is a need to go back through the legal code and solve some of these problems. There's so many fucking problems. But also, I'd like someone who is not, I really need to emphasize this, a fucking textualist pervert to do it. I need someone who understands the spirit of the damned law and understands that the people, not the corporations, need more protection. And, indeed, need protection from the powerful. That's... If I may, I feel like that's the point of law to begin with. If we were to exist in a lawless society, it is the rule of the powerful. No, it is the rule of the one with the bigger stick.
Yep.
Be it a metaphorical stick, such as the law, or an actual honest-to-God stick. Or in this particular case, it's a gun or
a giant monster that flies thousands of feet in the sky and drops bombs on you without seeing you.
Yeah, exactly. So the point of the law is to protect little people from bigger authorities that are actively harming them. That is what corporations are doing. Corporations don't exist to serve us, they exist to serve themselves. And the government, the one that is beholden to the people, the little guy, needs to step in and figure this shit out. But why isn't he not bringing this up? What is he doing?
Yeah, I mean, he's a member of the legal profession, so it kind of makes sense that he sees his peers as capable of handling the vagaries and nuance of common sense fairly. But the reality on the ground is simply that individuals haven't been trustworthy when considering judicial fairness, especially not without oversight over long times and distances.
Yeah, it's going back to that thing I talked to you about with Justice Gorsuch. He doesn't acknowledge that law is meant to protect the weak from the powerful, the poor from the rich, the minorities, be they racial or sexual, or basically anybody else who could be conceivably discriminated against for no reason other than they're different from the majorities. And you can't trust individual powerful people to really respect that power. They will abuse that power and rain it down upon other individuals that just it drives me so crazy.
Okay, so like ultimately, as sedate as the tone is, this has the same general energy as the other books on the right that we've read. Like in the we've gotten so far away from the good old days way, as though 2025 America is similar enough to 1950 or 1825 America to be governed in a similar manner. It's just another way to question the results of the liberal consensus of the late 20th century.
Yes, and yeah, I think that's what makes this book so much more dangerous than the other right-wing books that we've read so far. Those are provocative to the point of, frankly, being hilarious. Like, say what you will about Tammy Bruce and Pete Hegseth. It was fun. Fun is a very loose definition here, but it was still fun to read them.
Yeah, like Walrus with a bucket on its head, fun.
Yeah, like it's, what the fuck is going on here? But it gets your attention, right? It causes you to, like, pay attention to what they're fucking saying. This, on the other hand, is so sedate. It's literally anesthetic in written form. And it's incredibly boring. And we forget the actual message underneath the, I cannot emphasize this enough, dry, dull, depressingly sleepy words in it that make its readers potentially miss the point unless you go in expecting him to say some shit like this. If we didn't expect this, if we just took his words at face value, we would be far more sympathetic to Justice Gorsuch. But because we know this motherfucker, we knew to go in with skepticism, and we were able to read between some of these lines. Not everybody's going to do that. That's why we do this for you. Please hit like and subscribe. But, the shit he says is just, it's so fucking exasperating.
If you were to pick an adjective to describe your exasperation, would it be perpetual? Honestly, this book was just so boring. Like, I feel like there were things to say about it, maybe, but every time I have a thought about it, it just goes back to this book was not really written to be read.
No, it wasn't. It just...
Or maybe Neil's just really boring, I don't know.
Look, actually, are we recording?
Yeah, we are.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I'm so bored by this book, I don't even know if we are recording or not. But,
are we recording? Is this real life?
what is life? What are cows? But
is this just fantasy?
Caught in a landslide?
Exactly.
But look, full disclosure, I didn't actually really finish this book.
Good. It's so bad.
It's so bad. I tried so hard, but I swear to God, I would get 5 sentences into the book and then I would immediately be distracted. I somehow got ADD reading this book. I couldn't focus on anything he was talking about, because the way that he described everything, there were a bunch of legal terms in there that seemed like only lawyers could understand, I guess, or textual perverts or whatever. I am still proud of that, by the way.
It's true. It's 100% accurate. He is obsessed with the letter of the law to a point that is borderline fetishistic.
Yeah, and he's talking about federalism and the separation of powers and all of that, as though that is something super reverent that we have to go back to. Remind me again why he's been extremely sympathetic towards all of these court cases that relate to Donald Trump, especially in regards to the overreach of the executive. Because it seems like a bit of a contradiction, right?
Yeah, now that I think about it, everything that he lays out in this book is not pertinent to the decisions he's been making since Trump got in office.
No, not at all. And it just... I don't understand what the point of the book was. I really don't. Like, I guess we'll get into it with our denouements. But I'm really trying to figure out why this book was written. Like, normally, for the folks at home, little behind the scenes raising of the curtain here, normally I would go into and write this big old speech about who wrote this book, why was this book written, and should you read this book. And for the prior 6 books, it was fairly easy to figure out why each book was written. Tammy's book, Fear Itself, was written because don't be scared by a gun. Ezra and Derek's book was written to be abundance pilled. Fucking hate that term.
To abund.
Fuck off. And Owned was written to show how the billionaire class has taken over social media and is currently killing us all with grifters and disinformation. The War on Warriors was written to get straight white men to go back into the military and probably be deployed against us again. Did you hear, by the way, that Donald Trump is deploying?
He's federalizing D.C., I know.
Yeah. I wonder why he's doing that.
Yeah, can't imagine.
So, there's that. Original Sin was written to cash in and recount how Biden fucked us.
Yep.
And more specifically, the Democratic Party fucked us by allowing Biden to fuck us and get this fucker back into power. Fuck. Defectors was written, and is probably the most brilliant book to date, to show how minorities can be co-opted voluntarily into following ideologies that are just completely opposed to their very existence. This whole recounting of our absolutely fantastic journey to this point of yapping into the void is to show that, in general, we've had a fairly decent roadmap into what we're trying to do here. And we kind of figure out and understand what the authors are talking about, even if we don't agree with most, if not all of them, save for the Owen Higgins and Paula Ramos. This book is the first time where I am feeling completely at a loss as to what the hell Justice Gorsuch is talking about.
Well, I find myself wondering if maybe we are not privy to a thread of political thought, specifically within center-right lawyer types, that are just like, there's too much law and I have to listen to it and pay attention to it. I don't like that. I would like to just be a king who can render judgments without being questioned.
Sorry, you said center-right? The center-right believes that, not the far-right?
Honestly, I would be willing to say that somebody that identifies themselves as center-right would be comfortable with additional judicial overreach. That's
which is weird, because
partly because the far right now is, let's put all of the immigrants in camps.
Oh, yeah, that is
So,
the thing they do there.
that's part of the reason that the center right is where it is right now is because crazy Nazis have taken over the far right. So now the center right are like, but we just want, like, a small government and maybe just the ability to own a couple of people. That's all we want.
Just a couple of people. Literally own them. Holy fuck. Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Like, I can't think of any other reason why one would write not just this book, but this book in this way. Because it's so obvious when you take maybe 5 or 10 more minutes than he did to actually look at the examples that he came up with and explain why maybe this legislation exists. Like, okay, rabbits, having a magician register his rabbits is silly until you think of animal cruelty. That is why that exists, because especially smaller, unregistered owners of animals are notorious, especially when they're doing them for commercial reasons, for abusing animals.
Yeah.
The ketchup and the pH thing, okay, sure, that seems weird, but pH is directly related to bacterial growth. If you have the wrong pH at certain stages of manufacturing, that can cause food safety issues. Peanut butter. The fat content is regulated because 90% fat peanut butter would be much cheaper to manufacture, but it'd be a much lower quality product.
Yeah.
Like, and we can go on and on. It's same with the copper cleanup. Like, the reason that the copper cleanup is regulated is because when you have soil with arsenic in it, you cannot just clean it. You can't just take it and put it elsewhere. Wherever you put it now has arsenic in the soil.
So what you're saying is that this entire book is missing critical key details that provide context to each of these examples of what would otherwise be, I guess in theory, outrage-inducing?
Well, and this leads us to the why was this written? Because this has one thing in common with the rest of the stuff that we've read, especially from the right, and that is an intention to dismiss and ignore nuance. The idea that nuance, especially nuance in text sources, when you write it down, is silly, it's unnecessary, and ultimately it's oppressive because people are good and they'll just do the right thing. Which is bullshit.
That is
demonstrably, unless you are a wealthy white man over 60. Jeez. Like, and that's what bugs me about this, is the sedate tone covers up the fact that it's just playing the same fucking game of, well, I mean, really, we're just good, and the reason things are going bad is because you're just trying to make us do too much stuff. No, the reason that things are going bad is because you have started to be able to do the stuff we used to keep you from doing.
This sounds like the right-wing version of Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson with abundance.
Very much so.
Because
actually, and indicated on the same way that there's like no real suggestions.
There aren't actually.
Like abundance was be abund, and this is be less law.
Be less law.
The end. Fuck you, Neil.
What the fuck?
What does that even mean?
I can't believe it took me this long talking it out with you to realize that this is the right-wing version of abundance, except that abundance was actually readable.
Yes, well, and at least granted, both abundance and this basically took structural problems that exist and then talked about them in the most boring way you possibly could.
Yes, they did. But again, I have to credit Ezra and Derek in Abundance, episode 2, please hit like and subscribe, where they actually made it kind of interesting, where we were able to quote extensively from it, to go through each one and be like, okay, yes, I see what you guys are saying. This is fair. However, we have a problem with this, and this. Justice Gorsuch, on the other hand, and his law clerk, we can't forget her, Janine Nietzsche. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I don't fucking care.
Janie Nietzsche? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Janie Nietzsche? Probably Janie Nietzsche. But they can't write. This is not good writing. This is not compelling authorship that they're doing. This is incredibly dry recounting of various stories where they are missing the nuance of why these laws exist in the first place. And apparently, according to some articles that I've read, are actually missing some critical details within the book itself. So there's an article here from Bloomberg, written October 19th of 2024. The title, Neil Gorsuch Has No One to Blame But Himself, written by Noah Feldman. And it's essentially a book review of Overruled. And in this, Noah points out the following. Quote, for an example, consider the story behind the 2015 Supreme Court case of Yates versus United States, which overruled discusses extensively in its first chapter. Yates, a commercial fisherman, was criminally charged with catching undersized fish in the Gulf of Mexico, then destroying the evidence by throwing those fish away. A federal jury convicted Yates on 2 separate charges. One was unproblematic, destroying property to prevent seizure by federal agents. Yates had no basis to challenge this conviction, and he didn't. The other charge, the one that reached the Supreme Court, was a serious reach. Federal prosecutors charged Yates with violating a provision of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that criminalizes the destruction of any record, document, or tangible object with the intent to impede, obstruct, or influence the investigation of any matter within the jurisdiction of any department or agency of the United States. According to the prosecutors, the tangible objects in question were the fish. Gorsuch and his co-author, Janie Nietzsche, are perfectly correct to see this charging decision as mistaken. The relevant provision of Sarbanes-Oxley, passed in the aftermath of the Enron scandal, was clearly aimed at document destruction, not throwing dead fish overboard. And the Supreme Court was right to overturn that part of the conviction. In an opinion written by liberal lion Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the court explained why it made no sense to interpret the words tangible object outside of the context of Sarbanes-Oxley and its focus on documents. To bring the point home, Ginsburg quoted a 1932 Supreme Court precedent explaining that meaning may vary to meet the purposes of the law. That meaning could be arrived at by a consideration of the language in which those purposes are expressed and of the circumstances under which the language was employed. In other words, the purpose of the law matters. What the prosecutors got wrong was that they ignored the purpose of Sarbanes-Oxley and looked only at its words. Here's the catch, if you will. Lol. If Neil Gorsuch stands for any idea in his time on the Supreme Court, it is that purpose must not matter in interpreting statutes. Neither should context. Only the words count. In fact, textualism was behind the dissent in the Yates case written by Justice Elena Kagan and joined by most of the court's conservatives. It's not hard to imagine that if Gorsuch had been on the court at the time, he would have voted to uphold Yates' conviction.
Of course he would.
So long as judges insist on reading statutes without reference to their purpose or context, prosecutors will, understandably, charge defendants according to the literal words of the statute. Gorsuch's pet theory is the reason prosecution like Yates happen at all. If, however, judges look to a law's purpose, it follows that prosecutors won't have the same incentive to try to stretch statutes to cover cases that fall within their literal words but not their obvious purpose, unquote. So, yeah, someone else gets it. Someone else understands that Neil, Justice Gorsuch, is being either a hypocrite or a liar or dying of dementia, one or all of the above, any of the above, and it just doesn't make sense. Why did he write this? It's weird.
As much as I'd like to believe that what he is sinking into dementia, when I think about it, this fits perfectly into the overall project of bringing to reality the unitary executive theorem, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a multi-prong approach, and every prong has to kind of act differently and pretend not to be in cahoots to accomplish this. So the media basically chums the water by making it impossible for us to tell what's actually real. Mm-hmm. So we elect people that then gridlock the legislative. Mm-hmm. But for the trifecta, really the quadrifecta, to be complete, you also need a court that basically only jumps in when it's absolutely forced to, which means A, very strict, very narrow interpretation of existing laws, and B, an inclination to get rid of ones that you think aren't being executed correctly, not to reform them to be executed correctly. When those three things cooperate together, that leaves space for a truly powerful unitary executive. Which means the whole sedate tone of this thing is a fucking smokescreen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a complete smokescreen. Like, did you just recently see that the Supreme Court decision to I think it was to legalize gay marriage throughout the country, Obergefell or something like that?
Oh yeah, Burgerveld v. Hodges.
Yeah, that's being officially submitted to the Supreme Court again
Of course it is.
by that Kentucky woman. What the hell is her name?
I don't know, and I refuse to learn it.
Yeah, yeah, but
I
that's
hope a bee lives in her house forever.
oh my god, but yeah.
I mean, that's not surprising, right? Like, this was always a warning that as soon as they were done with the trans issue, when they felt like that wasn't getting the pull that it used to, they were going to jump immediately onto marriage equality. And here we are.
Here we are.
With the goal of the person making these decisions being one person and his sycophants,
Yeah.
Donald Trump. Or the president. But they want Donald Trump, and from what I can tell, they do not plan to let us ever elect anyone else.
That seems to be the plan so far. I'm still like, I don't know, like I'm looking ahead to next year, and I'm looking at how they're right now trying to gerrymander Texas to get 5 more seats out of it. And to their credit, Democratic legislators had a pretty decent idea.
They just left.
They just straight up left.
That was very funny.
That was actually hilarious, and I'm like, wow, clever, good job, guys. And of course, Texas is trying to get them back through the FBI.
Yeah, of course, because Kash Patel is an idiot.
Yeah, but even Kash Patel hasn't really made much of a comment on this, and best as I could tell, I could be wrong about this, but best as I can tell, the FBI isn't actually, like, hunting them down and arresting them.
Nah, because when you're the states' rights party, you kind of got to be careful about that, because they know that this isn't the end. Any reasonable Republican knows that there will be a Democrat in power in the future. And you do not want to start using the FBI to arrest state senators unless they are breaking, like, really obvious rape and murder laws.
Yeah, but at the same time, they're making the noises about it.
That's true. They would do it if they thought they could get away with it.
Yeah, and so on the one hand, you could see this as purely performative, which it probably could possibly maybe be.
I mean, reality show TV, presidency, pretty much everything's performative until it's not.
Yeah, and that's the part that worries me, until it's not.
Yep.
Because this is also a presidency and an administration where you're not supposed to be doing something, and it's made legally clear that for the present moment you're not supposed to be doing something, and yet they're doing the thing they're not supposed to be doing. For instance, to hammer this point home, ICE is using those, what's that company that has the trucks, starts with a P?
Oh, Penske?
Penske.
Yeah.
They're using Penske trucks to grab people still in Southern California, despite the fact that a stay, like a temporary restraining order, is still in place.
What's most crazy to me about that shit, that specifically, the Penske truck thing,
Yeah.
is prior to now, I only had one association with Penske trucks and masked men pouring out of them. Mm-hmm. And it's the Patriot Front. This was a tactic of theirs. All 4 years of Biden's presidency, they would show up in these big box trucks, pile out in these obvious white supremacist uniforms, and do white supremacist protests. That is what I associate with this image, and is the only thing I associate with this image. And I do not think it is by accident that ICE is now doing this, because it's unbelievably unsafe to move around in a Penske truck. You can get very badly hurt sitting in the back of a box truck with no seatbelt.
Yeah.
They're just doing this to show people, and I think it's to show very specific kinds of people. It's just getting very hard to ignore.
It's getting extremely hard to ignore. And the main point is that, again, we have a TRO in place, at least according to my understanding. I could be wrong. I'm not a lawyer. I've already made that fucking clear. That's why I cannot read this fucking book. And I swear to God, I'm never going to do this again. I'm going to actually finish other books from now on. But this is my one free pass to not finish this fucking book. But anyway, they're not supposed to be doing something, and yet they're doing it anyway. And who's going to stop them?
Yeah, well, theoretically the courts, but
Really?
not anymore.
Really? And so that's why when I'm looking at this performative bullshit being done in Texas over the gerrymandering thing and the supposed arrest warrants for all of the Democratic legislators that just noped right out of the state, not that they're hard to find, let's be reasonable here. They are not hiding.
I'm pretty sure all of them are like, I'm right here, I'm just not in my state because, it's doing a democracy subversion.
Yeah, and the FBI presently isn't doing something, and yeah, it's all performative until it's not.
Yep.
And I don't know when it's not is gonna happen with this.
Because I don't think they do either. They're just sort of winging it and hoping that eventually they can get to the point where they can make it not as much performative as it seems at the moment.
Which gives me this weird, like, I don't think hope is the right word, but it's like, the fact that they're just winging it, maybe, means that, yes, they do have a plan, but it's not a great plan. Because if it was a great plan, if they actually had a solid step-by-step plan, they wouldn't be winging it. What's the point of winging it when you have a plan? When you have a legally tight plan?
Not to continue to bring this up, but this book I'm reading about Nazi finance.
Where are you at it now? This was
about 3/4 of the way through, so I'm getting there.
Okay, so but like 2 months ago, you had already spent 2 months on it. So
it's a very long book and it's very dense.
Sorry,
but
continue.
I promise it's relevant.
Okay.
One of the things that is most striking to me overall about what the book challenged about my preconceptions is that Nazi Germany was not nearly as well planned out as it seems in retrospect.
Okay, yeah.
They were, at many points, totally fucking winging it, especially in the beginning when Hitler first took power and they were consolidating. It is very common for fascists to start with very little plan except I want all the power. And that once they've consolidated, because the reality is consolidation is not a process that you can plan, you just kind of have to wing it and consolidate as the world lets you. Once you've consolidated, you can then make a plan pretty easily because there's nobody checking you.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And this is true both in the domestic planning that Nazis did and also in the war planning. They were so haphazard that throughout the early 40s, the Allies had an estimation of how much foreign currency reserve that the Germans had in order to continue. And they were under the impression that they had the number wrong because the number was so low. They were like, there's no way. They couldn't have gone to war with this little money. That would be such a crazy thing to do. We must be wrong. And they weren't. All the estimates were right.
Oh my God.
The Germans were just crazy and, more importantly, not interested in planning.
Huh.
So that's something to be aware of, that fascists don't necessarily believe in the power of planning as much as they believe in the power of
the will?
Blitzkrieg.
The will?
Yes, exactly.
The triumph of the will?
Exactly.
God damn. I guess what is weird, but then maybe this is a fascist trope as well, is the contradiction of having winging it with Project 2025, which is a very clear step-by-step playbook that is unfortunately playing out effectively.
So far. And if you actually read the whole document, there's a bunch of stuff they're fucking up on. Like, that's part of what is they want it to seem like they laid out that plan document, and now they got power, and now they're just doing it. They're doing all of it. But they're not. They're just focusing on the parts that are currently working out. But even, for example, like the mass deportations, basically the premier policy of this administration.
Right.
They haven't deported that many people.
Yeah, haven't the numbers drastically dropped since like early July?
Yes, and more importantly, of the people they are like, it doesn't seem like there's a significant amount of evidence that they are deporting the people that they are sweeping up. So we're still paying to keep those people here in the country and alive, and we're probably now paying more because they are not working, and we're having to pay to imprison them.
Yeah. Wow.
Project 2025 was just something to be like, look, maybe we'll do this. And now they get to point at it and say we're doing this, despite the fact that the evidence implies that they are not actually accomplishing almost any of that. Most of what they're accomplishing is a purge. They've managed to purge a fuck ton of competent people from the government and replace them with incompetent loyalists.
Right.
But that's not what was in, I mean, yes, that was in Project 2025, but that was a really small part.
Right.
And if you can't do the rest, like what? Granted, that's kind of what the Nazis did. They were like, oh, we'll just take all the people that we don't like, and we'll put them in camps, and we'll force them to do the work that we don't have workers for. And then famine happened, and they were like, well, I guess we'll just have to murder everybody. That wasn't in the cards until like halfway through the plan.
Oh, God.
And that's what scares me most, is that we are not halfway through the plan yet. If this is the Holocaust, at the point that this was in 1934, they didn't plan to do the Holocaust yet.
No.
That wasn't in the cards.
No, there were plans at the time to deport them to, like, Madagascar.
That's correct. The Madagascar plan was big and popular.
Yeah.
And then they were like, maybe that would be expensive, and they probably still die. We can just kill him here. Like, that's how that happens. Fascism is generally not something that somebody starts in a democracy and thinks to themselves, I'm going to do a fascist genocide. No. They start a democracy and say, people aren't doing what I say. So they get a little bit more power, and they erode, and they erode, and they erode, and eventually they get enough power to no longer have to do democracy. And then chips start to fall, because humans cannot make good decisions in that circumstance unless you are at extreme war.
Yeah. So, can I just point out that fascism is super fucking confusing, where it's like it's simultaneously nefarious and brutally efficient at times, and yet simultaneously at the exact same time unbelievably incompetent and just fucking up all over the place. And in either case, it's bad. Like
Hannah Arendt, I don't remember the book, so I think it's Origins of Totalitarianism. It's a book. She was a Holocaust survivor, and she wrote about the Holocaust. But she talks about how it's hard to tell whether or not it is purposeful or not, but it is useful for fascist regimes to be purposefully irrational and purposely incompetent. Because when you do those things, you can very, very quickly identify who is in the in-group and who is not by who lies on your behalf.
Yeah.
It is very powerful for consolidating your power, because anybody who says you're incompetent when you're incompetent gets the axe. So, as scary as it is, this might not even exactly, like, it's probably not on purpose, in the sense that being incompetent is probably just something they can't help.
Yeah.
But it's probably also not necessarily hurting them as much as we'd hope.
Yeah, and it also has a benefit of this unbelievable incompetence breeds fear amongst the populace, because you're not entirely sure what they're going to do next. You're not entirely sure where they're going with this, so you live in this state of perpetual terror the entire time, just waiting for the other shoe to drop, but you don't even know what that other shoe is. It even a shoe? Is it something else? You don't know what's going to drop, but theoretically, something else has to drop at some point, right?
Yeah, and it fits very well into Donald Trump's overall style of communication. Like, when he talks to his base, he speaks in these vague, kind of emotionally couched words that allows people to fill in whatever their best assumption of his inclinations are.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, all of us who are afraid of him listen to him, and we automatically fill in the scariest possible thing, which motivates us to comply ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's risk management.
It is. It's really too bad that these fascists are so good at fascism.
They're good at fascism, and they're not good at anything else.
Well, that's partly why they're doing the fascism, because that's what makes a fascist. A person who is only good at understanding and hurting other people will push for fascism. Because a logical world where people reason and debate doesn't work for them.
Nope. And calls back to episode 3 of when we were talking about Owned, and we were talking about
all these fucking weirdos.
They're so weird. That, man, when that campaign soundbite dropped from Governor Walz, like, these are just weird people, I thought that was it. I thought that was the antidote. I thought that was going to wake everybody up and be like, wow, you're right. These people actually are really fucking weird. And he was not wrong.
Well, and while he is no longer as relevant in the political zeitgeist, calling them weird is, in the sense that that's basically been the main highlight of criticism, not of policies, but of the personalities of people like Stephen Miller or J.D. Vance. They're just weird dudes.
They're weird, sad, angry dudes. They're not even dudes. They're losers.
Yes. Yes, they are.
And we made that point back in episode 3 talking about the tech billionaires who are fucking losers who would be red-pilled in their mom's basements if not for the fact that they have a fuck-off amount of money.
Yes, and in some ways, Elon Musk is still red-pilled in his own basement, despite being a man with 14, 15 children? And he still spends all his time tweeting!
Good sweet Lord Almighty. He's such a fucking loser. Why have the losers inherited the earth?
Maybe because when you're a loser and you see everyone else as a loser, you're more willing to execute cruelty against them, and that, more than anything else, is predictive of an ability to make money in an unregulated market?
Maybe.
Which is not to say that I have, like... As much as it hurts me to say this, I do see the value of capitalism. Or rather, I see the problem it's meant to solve.
Okay.
Capitalism is a system designed to avoid shortages. That's it. It's a system that, when there is not enough of something, makes the thing inaccessible to people based on wealth rather than based on position. Capitalist economies don't tend to experience heavy shortages of things. It's just not that common. Planned economies do, but they don't really experience price inflation the same way. They are both tools that are useful, but both are fucking useless if you only use them. And the thing I am tired of on the right in general is this notion that the problem with the market is that it is that it's over-regulated.
Hey, bringing back to overruled.
Exactly. Like, no, and it's not over-regulated. It is under-regulated because we are trying to use a regulatory framework that worked 100 years ago for an economy without an internet.
Yeah, and by the way, also at that time, that economy that existed in the 1950s, that was also at a time when we taxed billionaires up to like 94%.
Exactly.
And it worked so incredibly well.
Yeah, it's not like
for white people.
Yes, that's fair. That is very fair. It is important to recognize that when that was happening, we were basically enslaving an underclass of our society. But it just doesn't, like, we don't exist in a world where less regulation will help us anymore for the simple fact that the monsters are bigger. We talked about this before, but one of the things that we did not talk about in the scripted portion is it's not just big corporations that threaten us anymore either. It's fucking foreign governments that have access to us on a level that is unprecedented. The internet has allowed the Chinese government and its coordination of spies to directly access the American public and advertise them products, but not just products, politicians, ideas, places to live, legislation. Those are all things we need protection from, and we cannot individually protect ourselves against the foreign intelligence of foreign nations. We need well-structured legal systems to do so.
Yeah. And we do have to balance that out to give Gorsuch his fair due. We do have to balance that out with these laws that are interpreted in ways that harm the people they're supposed to be protecting. But
yes.
That requires a non-textual based approach to the law in general, a more federalism based approach to the law in general.
Yeah, and it's also not, like, as I said before, a small code is not immune from poorly written laws.
No, of course not.
You could have one law and it could be a bad fucking law.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of law in general. And the idea that what's causing this inclination towards miscarriage of justice when there's more law is the amount of law and not how we are writing it and what procedures we use to create them is absurd. It's just really more of this stuff that seems like it's individual thoughts, but it's really tied into this long-term project to give us a king.
Yeah. And it's tied into this project to give us a king because the world has gotten much more complex and out of our control, more so than ever. And humans, being the silly little creatures we are, rather than finding comfort with our communities and with our neighbors, with our families and friends, we're instead ceding power to an unelected monarch who will solve our problems for us because they're problems that we no longer can comprehend. nor do we really understand the problems we're dealing with anymore. Partially because there's so much disinformation out there that we don't even know what's real anymore. We don't know what's real outside of our little bubbles.
Yes,
anymore.
and even when we know, we cannot agree with even people who are in our own communities.
Yes, which drives me so crazy. And it leaves me wondering what the way out is. The way out probably is to, again, just reestablish that connection with our communities. But that goes back to what we were talking about in the last episode, dealing with defectors. How do you talk to people who are that far gone and who are in a different reality from you, save for having those people go through such a traumatic event that it completely rocks their world and destroys their viewpoint, where you're there to help them pick up the pieces? But then that implies that you want to be, for instance, an accelerationist, where you want more bad things to happen, especially to these people who are living in these alternate realities, to get them to wake up. But that's going to require a whole bunch of other people, most of them innocent people, to get equally, if not more so, harmed in the process. And this is a level of desperation to get out of this vicious cycle that we're in right now. It's kind of terrifying to think about the implications of what accelerationism in this regard would potentially mean for our communities in order to reconnect with them and basically rebuild society from the ground up. But that implies that society has to be torn down to the ground to begin to rebuild it. And that is a daunting and sobering prospect.
Yes. Though, just hypothetically, I think there might be a non-tear down society entirely based approach to looking at this problem.
Okay.
So, the internet, as a technology in the modern era, is basically a tool to acquire attention to sell to others. That is what the owners of this technology are using. And it's notable to me personally that of the social networks that are popular at the moment, Twitter, Instagram, X, Bluesky, all of these social media platforms, and realistically all social media platforms that have ever been meaningfully popular, have been optimized to connect to people who are not in your community.
Mm-hmm.
They're optimized to connect you to people who theoretically you have ideological agreements with, but really, it's to connect you with people you do not have a personal connection with.
Right.
And if you think about it, that is a great way to create an attention harvester. Because it's something that gives you the impression that you're having social connection, and it does draw you into the experience, because humans are social creatures and our outcomes are directly related to how good we are at talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get there, the content that you're consuming doesn't actually have any direct connection to your life.
It's a parasocial relationship.
It's something very easy to disconnect from and connect to an advertisement with. Something that wouldn't work nearly as well if you were actually interacting with people that you had in your life consistently, that you had real history with, that you had real conversations with. You spend a lot more time talking to them, looking at their stuff, looking at stuff that doesn't make these motherfuckers any money.
Mm-hmm.
But if all your friends are people you've never met, you're going to get distracted by ads all the time. In fact, you probably wouldn't even easily be able to tell when they start inserting ads that are not easily labeled.
That's right. Or you wouldn't even be able to tell if what you're talking to is in fact a human being or is in reality a bot.
Bingo fucking bango. Or the horrible middle ground of a person who is being paid to mimic someone else online by a foreign government.
Yeah. Yeah.
As much as, like, and I'm not in any way against the complete destruction and rebuilding of society if that's what's necessary.
Right.
But I do think there is room to consider why it is that this unbelievably powerful technology that we have invented in the last 3 decades has been utilized to disconnect us from our communities.
It has.
Because it didn't have to be.
No.
There's nothing about a phone that says that you couldn't use it primarily to connect with people that you could drive to and see.
No, if anything, we saw during the early 2010s the true potential of social media. We've seen how Twitter was used to fuel revolutions.
Mm-hmm.
Twitter was used to allow activists to talk to one another and be able to get around official state control, to organize and to connect with one another and to plan things out.
Yep, and that caused that industry to grow all over the world. And once they did that, they ran out of ways to easily make profits. And so they shifted from that model to the Myanmar model, where you go into a country and you provide them internet exclusively through social media. And then when coups start to happen, you help the government do genocide. Because that's profitable, because they'll pay you to help them do genocide.
Yeah.
That is my pitch, that before we destroy society, we should maybe consider that these tools that we have built this way have not been built this way for our benefit.
No,
They have been built this way to extract value and money from us for our oligarchs. And that there could be some real benefit in restructuring these tools to work for us.
Yeah. But that's going to take a lot of work.
Yes, it does. My only pitch is that it would be less work than, like, destroying the whole government and replacing it with a new one.
Yeah, for sure. But, like, recently, I was watching part 2 of this series created by the YouTube creator Mini Minute Man. Love that guy. Please like and subscribe to his stuff after you like and subscribe to ours, of course. But if anybody is here from Mini Minute Man, hi, we like you guys. Hello. But he was recently talking about Shane Vibes, if I'm not mistaken. The guy on Instagram and now Rumble who is peddling unbelievable amounts of conspiracy theories to the point of conspiracy theory slop, and is also following an Alex Jones model.
Oh, does he sell supplements or something?
Yes, he does.
God damn it!
He sells like the chalk brand of shit.
Of course.
All of these stupid and weird supplements. The dude does have a sense of humor. It seems like he wears like a pyramid on his head with the
Okay, so he's
tinfoil.
going full send with the conspiracy nonsense.
Yeah, no, but it's like, it was weird watching that and watching how dedicated to the grift he was. This was a guy who would post short form stuff on Instagram and post on average like 10 videos a day sometimes.
Holy
At
crap.
one point he posted, like one day in July or something, he posted like 31 videos.
Give Elon a run for his money. That's impressive.
And it seems like every day he also does a 3 to 4 hour live stream on Rumble.
How?
I don't know.
I mean, his content must be
It's
like mind-blowingly low quality.
Oh no, it is mind-blowingly low quality, and the guy eventually comes off as essentially a snake oil salesman.
Yeah, I mean that must be what he's going for.
And it's stuff that's like, it's contributing to the distrust that we all have in our institutions for varying degrees of justifiable reason, and selling us stuff that is being peddled to us as a way to reestablish control. And that's the people that we're fighting against.
Yeah.
Them and the billionaire oligarchs and the bots and all of those people. And I agree that we should find a way. And I've had this discussion recently with someone very close to me who's even more radicalized than I am. And this person is looking at social media as this hellscape. What it once was could have been something great, but it's now been taken over completely. And I've tried to make the argument that revolutionary and radical movements have to be adaptive. They have to use the tools that are available to them to find a way around seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And it is a good idea to try and use social media to reconnect with people you actually give a shit about, you actually bond with, you actually want to help and be helped by. But you also have to figure out a way to weed out the bots. You have to weed out the grifters. You have to weed out the government and billionaire spies that are going to be involved.
Yeah, the non-humans.
The non-humans. The ghouls.
Very much.
The ghouls and their bots.
Ghoul bots.
Ghoul bots. They're not to be confused with joy bots.
But yeah, I think to round it back to the book,
Yeah.
I will give it to Neil. He did a very good job of almost convincing us that this was just some lawyer nonsense.
Yeah.
It was so close to just being like, oh, he's just like a law guy who really likes laws, and he wrote a thing about maybe there's too many laws and he's just a law guy.
Yeah.
No, he's just another piece of this let's have a king puzzle.
And he's the most dangerous one.
Mm-hmm. Because he's very easy to ignore and one of the most powerful people in the country.
And that's terrifying.
Yes, it is.
Between
Between him and upside down flag Alito, I'm real worried.
And I'm looking back at what we've done over the past hour to 2 hours of recording. Oh my God, it's been an hour to 2 hours of recording. And thinking how going into this recording, because again, full disclosure, wasn't able to finish the book, got about 2/3 of the way through.
I finished it and I gave him permission. It is so boring.
Yes, I'm never gonna let myself live this down. Don't you worry. But I went into it going like, what the fuck are we gonna talk about with this book, aside from the fact that it's so boring? But then, as we started recording, I think I got the most mad that I've ever been in this whole fucking podcast, talking about this guy and how he's essentially lying to us. He's lying to us about what he does, what he believes in, what people like him believe in.
Specifically in order to pervert the institution in which he has control to his personal goals.
Which goes hand in hand with the rest of these fascists who go into power to discredit the entire institution that they were either elected or somehow found themselves appointed into, going out of their way to deconstruct the things that protect us, the things that benefit us, the things that make us great. And then say, see, this is proof. This is proof that government doesn't work. No, your kind of government doesn't work. The government that we are trying to create is a government of, by, and for the people, not for these fucking ghouls that are out here to steal from us, who would like all of us to honestly just fuck off and die at this point so that they can take all the money and live on their little private islands and have bots and God knows what else keeping them alive until the end of their days while the earth kills them. The earth isn't dying. The earth is killing us because we fucked up. We fucked up the balance. And we cannot take these ghouls lightly. We need to see them as the enemy.
Yep, and there is truly nothing more dangerous than a ghoul with a convincing skin suit.
Which gets into some of the weird conspiracy theories, doesn't it?
I'm not talking lizard people.
I'm taking the piss. I'm taking the piss.
It would be very funny for me to joke as though I'm like a little bit of because I'm a little bit of a lizard person believer. Not in the I don't think that they're people, but in the I think that absolute power does break the brain in some ways.
I think what it is where you and I will agree is that the people in power are biologically human beings.
Yes, 100%.
In regards to morality, they are not.
Yeah, I think they are intentionally trying to represent themselves as something inhumanly transcendent in order to enable their oppression.
Which is what makes them scarier, because then they don't see us as equal to them.
Exactly.
They see us as chattel.
Yep. Chattel and fodder, depending on our age and ability.
And it loops me back to when I was getting so mad at Neil for the COVID-19 stuff and the vaccines. I got that mad because in the second part to Milo Rossi's debunking of Shane Vibes, he was talking about what happened in American Samoa in 2018 to 2019, prior to the pandemic, when, because of anti-vaxxer mis- and disinformation spread by, among others, our current Secretary for Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and his brainworm, there was a measles outbreak.
Yeah, I heard about this.
Where 83 people died of measles. And the vast majority of them were children. And RFK Jr. took no responsibility. If anything, he blamed the American Samoans themselves.
Of course he did. He's a jackass.
He is a jackass. But his approach to it and his mentality of it mirrors that of the other ghouls who see children dying, parents having to buy tiny headstones to bury their children as not only not their problem, but still furthering their own agenda to take as much money and power from us as possible.
Yep. Win at any cost includes the caskets of children.
Yeah. And so I just kind of want to finish it on this note. People like Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, as well as Chad Dude Bro Justice Brett Kavanaugh, President Donald J. Trump, Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary RFK Jr., Pam Bondi, Attorney General, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem. The list goes on and on and on. These are people who see the dying of children as a good thing for their cause. They may be biologically human beings. They are not like us. These are ghouls. These are pedophiles. These are Nazis. And they are our enemies. And the sooner we decide that our neighbor isn't our enemy, but our comrade, someone who can help us break our chains and rise up against these people, these ghouls who want to kill us and take everything from us, and recognize they are our enemies, the better off we will all be.
And now for the section we like to call our denouement. So, first question, who wrote this book?
The first author of this book is Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch. His most recent book, A Republic If You Can Keep It, was a New York Times bestseller, whatever, and won the 2022 Burton Award for the Book of the Year in Law. Janie Nietzsche most recently served as a Senate-confirmed board member of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. Previously, she was a fellow at Harvard Law School, and she received her bachelor's in arts and physics and her MA in statistics from Harvard University and her JD from Harvard Law School. So, of course, she's from Harvard. And she has clerked for Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Neil Gorsuch of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Second question, why was this book written?
So initially going into this, what I wrote on the script was federal government bad. Basically what it amounted to. The federal government got too big, too overarching, needs to be significantly dialed back. That's what Gorsuch would tell you. And it's done in such a dull, dry, depressing manner that if you already hated the guy going in, you would think that's the actual purpose of it. Now, after having discussed the book, it's more to keep us distracted, and it's another pronged assault on American institutions, in this case the judiciary, in order to serve what essentially functions as a unitary focus of executive power. So this is the nefarious version of Fear Itself by Tammy Bruce or The War on Warriors by Pete Hegseth. Just tearing down institutions to replace them with more fascist regimes, but in the most dry and dull way possible.
And our last question, should you read this book?
Do you have sleeping problems? This book might help you with that because it's so goddamn boring.
I can actually vouch for that. I did fall asleep listening to this book.
I can also vouch for this as well. I tried reading this book many, many times late at night to try and catch up on actually finishing this book and just fell right the fuck to sleep. Do you have any interest in law? I would say find someone else who actually knows how to write. And normally at this point, I would say, no, don't read this book. It's not worth any of your time. However, after having discussed this book with my colleague, I have decided that the only reason that you should truly, honestly read this book is to understand part of the playbook, how even the most evil, corrupt, and nefarious shit can be wrapped in the most mind-numbingly boring words and prose that any person could come up with. You need to be able to see this and be able to understand its purpose so that you don't get distracted by books like this. Because we talked earlier about how Fear Itself and War on Warriors were dangerous books. No, this is truly a dangerous book. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Perpetually Exasperated. If today's conversation got you thinking a little bit deeper and a little more exasperated about everything, we want to hear from you. Give us a like, leave a review, share the show. Please send your feedback, thoughts, or questions you'd like us to answer in your comments.
Next time, we'll be reading and talking about Lawless, How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes by Leah Littman. A book that, per Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, is a lively narration on how big special interests captured the Supreme Court and redeployed it to deliver on the least popular policy planks of the Republican Party, ably documenting the court's devolution as it was yoked into service to a political party and a billionaire class.
Until then, be critical, be skeptical, and remember, it's okay to be exasperated and to think outside the binary political spectrum presented to us. Stay safe, friends.